And welcome to Ladyada.
Hey everybody, and welcome to my desk. Sorry, I just kicked the camera. Happy snowy Sunday to everyone, and it's a superb owl Sunday as well for those who celebrate, like to watch. Good for you.
Yeah, we don't know what's going on the Super Bowl this year because we don't have a television in the normal sense. So we're gonna see if there's any interesting technology. Sometimes the Super Bowl commercials or the Super Bowl itself has a lot of Adafruit stuff because of LEDs and the costuming.
Yeah.
A former Adafruit team member started a company called Smooth Technology, and their stuff is always in every big giant event. James DeVito and team did some amazing stuff with Lady Gaga and other artists in the past. It's awesome to see LEDs everywhere. But Ladyada, I think you've been working on some stuff.
I have been working on some stuff. Last week, remember we did the we did like the pre-recorded.
Yeah.
And we did the great search
we
for the battery.
We show how to replace a battery, and Luna's been using you know,
beep, beep.
stuff. Yeah,
she loves it. And so let's go to the computer, and I'll talk about the design I was working on today.
Fruit Jam. Everybody likes Fruit Jam. Everybody's commenting about Fruit Jam. Everyone has something important to say about Fruit Jam. Fruit Jam. Fruit Jam.
Yeah, sorry, I was just like thinking about something.
Fruit Jam.
Like somehow ideas come to my head when I'm in the middle of a conversation.
Do you want to write them down real? Do you want to write it down real fast?
No, it's fine. I was just thinking about like how I'm going to do the speaker stuff.
Okay.
So Fruit Jam, which is a working name, is a board that I designed last week, this week, and it came actually because I don't know why, but I was looking at my RSS feeds. So like the last person who reads RSS feeds, and I was looking at Hackaday Hack Chat with Eb and Upton, and this was published in January, and I was like, oh, I'm going to watch this and just see, because one thing that is really great about Evan is because he gets to kind of run the thing. It's a little bit like, it can't be classified if the president says it. It can't be a secret if Evan says it. So sometimes like future product ideas or like stuff that they're going to do or like plans, he talks about them. And so it's a good way to kind of see like what's happening from the Raspberry Pi team. And one thing that kind of came up a lot was talking about the RP2350 and like when is it going to be available at DigiKey? Hopefully soon, they said. But another thing that came up a lot was this project called the IchigoJam. So look at the logs. I don't know if I can search. It's like not true scrolling, right? I don't think there's a way to like search it. But there was a discussion about what was the idea behind the DVI hack for output for the RP2040 and also the HSTX? Because somebody asked about HSTX, and everyone's like, oh yeah, part of it was like, I really wanted IchigoJam to use the RP2040. And this was, I was like, okay, I remember hearing about this like many, many years ago. And the idea is it's a very Media Lab-ish project. I'm not taking credit for it. I'm just saying it's like, it reminds me a lot of the projects that I saw at the Media Lab. Like a little learning computer, right? Everyone's always making learning computers. This one had, when it was released, a LPC 1114, which we used to stock a bunch of the LPC stuff. K-Town really liked LPC from NXP. They were really cool chips. And they were one of the first ones that had a USB ROM bootloader, which was also like beautiful, right? You couldn't brick the chip. And what was neat about this was that this did have USB, and the USB could act as it says PS2 only, but I thought it could do real USB. Maybe it could only do USB, like keyboards that were USB/PS2 combos. but it had a keyboard and a video output, and you would plug it in and you would get this kind of like, let's see if I can get a good image from how it works. Love image search. Okay, so it would look a little bit like this. You'd plug in a monitor and you'd plug in a keyboard. This is it working on a Raspberry Pi. I don't know if I can find one with the original. Okay, here's the original. TV screen. You'd plug it in and you would like type it into it, and it was very evocative of for people of my like Gen X generation, of like the Apple II and the Commodore 64 and the ZX Spectrum and like whatever. Right? There was like dozens of these computers where, or like the Coco. I remember I had a Coco. Not when I was actually young. I had it when I was a little bit older. From Radio Shack, and it was like, you know, they would all come with keyboards because there was no such thing as like a standalone keyboard. There was a little like typey keyboard. And there was space on the top. You'd put a CRT monitor. You'd get like a television. You'd plug in the television, and then you could plug in accessories and cartridges and stuff, and you would like type in. And the funny thing about these computers, which was kind of like, and now is a little heartwarming, is it would pop you directly into like a command line where you would just type in, you know, like peek, poke, loop, whatever. You would program it directly, and then you could use a command line to load programs in. But for the most part, like there was no like graphical interface. Another thing that was really neat was that they booted instantly, right? Like you plugged in and it was like ding, like it was up. There was no like loading, updating, connecting to the internet, you know, whatever. So when we did the Metro RP2350, which I'll also show maybe on the overhead because I was just doing the tester for this. Let me unplug this beast. Boop. Some stuff. Okay, so if we go to the overhead. Oops. Of course, as always, it's shiny. Sure. So if you look at this design, so when I remember, like this has gone through like a bunch of revisions because originally I had the RP2350A, which was a fine chip, but didn't have enough pins to do all of the GPIO. And also I wanted to have like 6 true analog inputs. So we updated to the 2350B. And the 2350B has like so many more pins because it's an 80-pin QFN that you can have DVI output through here, and you can have USB native, and you can have, you know, flash, NPS RAM, a micro SD card slot, all the Metro Arduino compatible GPIOs, NeoPixel, SPI, STEMMA QT, you know, boot button, which is also a user button, and debug output. And I also, because we had a couple pins left over, one of the things that Scott asked me to do is add a little USB host port. So you can see it says 5, D minus, D plus ground. And these are just consecutive pins. There's nothing special about them. But you can run the PIO bitbang USB host code on there with TD-USB. And so this, you can connect a keyboard and a mouse. And in fact, if you look at the tester, which I was working on this weekend, one of the things I do is those USB pins go out to it's so bright, go out to a USB port, and then I plug in like any USB device, and I just, you know, just test it, it enumerates. So this is USB, this goes, you know, this could be video. So there's a lot of GPIO, and we kind of made this joke of like, oh, you know, we have DVI support in CircuitPython and in Pico SDK. And then, okay, you go back to the computer. Mm-hmm. And if you have USB, and you can have USB host, you have DVI output, and then you still have some PIO, and the DVI doesn't require PIO. So you have PIO for USB, and you still have like one PIO left over you could use for I2S. And we were like, oh, you know, you can make like a full computer that has video out, keyboard and mouse in, and, you know, audio output, like you'd have a little mini computer. And so when I saw this IchigoJam thing kind of brought up, I was like, oh man, you know, like the Metro RP2350 is basically a modern version of this IchigoJam board, but with this much, 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 much faster chip. And of course, you still have native USB for debugging and uploading. You don't have to like share one USB port. You don't have to do PS2. It's all like true USB. So I designed this board. I'll just go through it really fast because I'm still, it's, by the way, it's still very much in progress. Let me hide. Whenever we go to 720p, I forget how small everything is. Maybe I can tuck this up here for now. Okay. So, and then no updates. Okay. Now, get a little bit more. So the USB here, RP2350 with like all this funky power supply stuff it needs, PS RAM and flash. And that's really important because whenever you want to run like emulations and games and stuff, one thing that people bump into a lot is you need to load like the state machine of the program and whatever program you're running, which is usually originally on a cartridge, into RAM, because like you have to have very, very fast access and to do emulation. So you can't have it on the SD card, because then you're like constantly going off to SPI land to get the data off the SD card. You really want to load it all into RAM, especially if you're doing like game emulators, because they're expecting the mapping to be like one instruction. Like you request this address from the ROM, you get it next cycle or within like a couple cycles. So 8 megabytes of PS RAM, which adds a couple dollars, but it's still totally cool. Big on-off switch. I kind of like this. In the IchigoJam had this big on-off switch, and I picked one that was really tall because I want to have like a little top case, and then you would have a switch on the top. I put a USB hub here, a 2-port hub. Well, it's actually a 4-port hub, and then I only use 2 ports. So you have mouse and keyboard, or 2 game pads, or I don't know, you have a MIDI keyboard or a USB floppy disk. Your choice. So I liked having 2 USB ports. I think like that's kind of key. In theory, I could take off the power switch and add a 3rd, but I really think 2 is kind of plenty, right? A couple NeoPixels. I thought like there's a couple IchigoJam projects that were like, oh, light up LEDs and pixels. Like, oh, we just have those built in because that's also a space here. 3 buttons. One of them is the UF2 button, but it's also a user button, and then 2 more buttons. Stemma QT, and also like a 3-pin, just analog input output, the reset button. This is right now a iSpy. So if you want an external TFT display, it'd make it really easy. But I'm also tempted to maybe replace this with an ESP32C3 or C6 to add like Wi-Fi support. But I'd only do it if it was like very inexpensive. I wouldn't do it if it added $7 to cost. I'd only do it if it added like $3 or $4 to the cost. So it needs to be one of the newer small modules. DVI connector, HDMI connector, and then directly connected, and it uses like all the GPIO pretty much. And then I2S output, and I'll talk about this in the Great Search. I wanted specifically one that had both speaker built in, mono. So if you didn't have headphones, it would like beep on its own, like you could have little tunes coming out of it with like a Class D 4 ohm to 8 ohm speaker. But I also wanted to support headphones, and not just line out, but actual headphones, because I feel like there'll be times where you want to like put on headphones and you're doing something directly. You don't want it going to like, when would you go into line out? Like maybe if you had a monitor that had audio, so it should be line out or headphone. But basically, I was kind of like, just make sure it does both. There's nothing sadder than line out. You plug in headphones and it can't drive that audio level. So it's either really quiet or really distorted. So true stereo headphone. And then you can see the 200 microfarad blocking caps here. And I'm trying to think, like, what was this shape? I think this was a TFT screen. I was like, oh, what if I had the TFT screen built in? But I ended up not doing that. And then I also had a bunch of GPIO left over, including analog pins and digital pins. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 GPIO. Half of them are analog, half of them are digital only. And of course, you get like, I2C, I2C, SPI, UR. If you want like those, you can of course configure them. And then 5 volt, 3 volt, and ground. So you could power, little motors or servos or whatever. So I thought little expansion cards type thing going on here. That's cool. And that's it. And I made it business card size. And it kind of ended up fitting quite nicely into that. You know, it's like I picked the size before I did the layout, but then I was like, oh, it kind of worked out. There's a little speaker connector here, but I think I might actually put one of our little oval speakers here, like it would be on the board. So like I said, it would have like it would be able to beep and bloop on its own without having to connect external speakers. So that's the design. How am I doing on time?
You're at the 15-minute mark.
Great. Let's do, and then there's a lot of questions. I'll just go through them really fast. People post on the forum. You can post on social media, Blue Sky. So you ask, can I sign up for notification? We'll make it coming soon. I'm getting my prototypes next week. So by mid next week, I'll probably have a coming soon page and people can sign up to get notified. No ETA. This is just like, that way you'll get an email. And then how far can you take a computer thing exactly? Doom's an obvious choice. Yeah, Doom is like, there's already Doom running on the RP2040, 2350. So I think it should be totally easy-ish to make it run on this, hopefully with USB keyboard as well. Microcomputer running bare metal CircuitPython REPL. So yeah, that could happen. And then minimal Linux build. It doesn't have a memory management unit, and that's kind of required to do Linux. There are no MMU Linux builds, but they kind of like aren't great. 8 megs PS RAM and 16 megs flash is not really, I mean, you could do it as a conceptual fun thing, but it wouldn't be very enjoyable. You wouldn't be able to like do much with it. 2-player arcade, yep. You know, if there's games, I don't think you could run a MAME emulator necessarily. Again, those really are, you know, they require a lot. I don't think anyone's ported MAME proper from being very x86 specific to ARM Cortex M33, but you know, definitely like Nintendo emulators and, like I said, Commodore 64 emulators. What about the BBC micros? Sure. Yeah, I think there is even a build for RP2350, RP2040 of the BBC micros. This would just be extending it again to support DVI output and USB input. And then people are like really excited. You can't call it Raspberry Jam. Yeah, I don't want to call it Raspberry something because I feel like that would.
No.
First off, there's already a thing called Raspberry Jam, which is like I think an event that the Pi Foundation holds. I don't want to make it be like, oh, it's Pi. And then CircuitPython, MicroPython, absolutely. Data logging, yeah, there's a micro SD card slot on there with SDIO, so you can do fast reads and writes. DAP interface, yeah, little LCD. I think I might make a little plug-on LCD that you could put on for like quick, you know, you want to have a built-in display. Amazing idea. What about Ethernet? You could do Ethernet via like a WIZnet chip. By again plugging into that header, you would add SPI. Ethernet, it would be okay. We're kind of working on making our Ethernet support a little bit better. But yeah, you could have Ether support. But like I mentioned, I think I would rather try to add Wi-Fi via an ESP32 C3 or C6 module, like a low cost. You know, it's not going to Bluetooth low energy necessarily or Bluetooth classic, but you could like open a socket, get some data. There's a Linux port for the RISC-V cores of the PS RAM. There's no device tree. No, this board doesn't even exist. It's not even a device tree subsystem or layout. But yeah, RISC-V is actually a good point. This is a RISC-V dual core too. So if you want to make your own little RISC-V mini computer, go to town. Again, it's not going to be as fast as the ARM33, but like you're excited about the Hazard core, go for it. Somebody suggested Lady Marmalade, which is a fun name. I'm very interested. Great looking Pico board. FruitJam's a nice name. Raspberry name, you know, but Raspberry is a problem. Portable 64. They want to play Sokoban on the C64. And then what's the price point? Price point, I don't know yet exactly, but like it should be less than $40. But I just have to spec all the components. Like there's nothing particularly expensive on here, but it is a fairly complex board. There's through-hole components. There's a lot of parts. So I'm, you know, and again, depends on whether I add Wi-Fi. So like, I'm going to like hazard a guess of about $30-ish, 35, after all said and done. But again, I don't want to, that's not a promise. That's just like, I look at it, I do math in my head, and that's kind of the number that pops out. Okay. Now I'm really ready to do the great search.
Okay.
Where in the world is that part I
The Great Search brought to you by DigiKey and Adafruit. Thanks so much, DigiKey. Every single week, Ladyada uses the power of engineering to help you, yes, you, find the things you're looking for on digikey.com. Ladyada, what is the Great Search of the week this week?
Okay, for this week, for my Fruit Jam mini computer board, I had a specific quest that I went on, and you can follow along with me. I really wanted, this board has a headphone output and also a 48 ohm speaker mono output. And basically what I wanted is is a chip that can take I2S in, and it can use an M clock, although it'd be cool if you didn't need to have an M clock, just because it just saves me one GPIO, one pin. And it would have two possible outputs, either headphone output and not line level output. A lot of DACs have line level, but they can't actually drive headphones. I want to be able to drive 16 ohm headphones so you can plug in your Beats by Dre or whatever, your cans in, and it'll actually be able to give you fairly good audio output because it can drive that load. And also, I want to be able to drive a little mini speaker. So the idea with this computer is if you don't have headphones, it'll have a little speaker, not like a great one, but like, beep and boop, and you can hear from within the speaker. But you plug in headphone, and then ideally, it would even auto detect when the headphones are plugged in and switch to headphones. So you could have good quality output if you have line level speaker headphone, and if you don't, you have the built-in speaker. And I wanted to do this without using a lot of components. I didn't want to get like the DAC and then two amplifiers. I wanted it, it's like, let's make something compact. Doesn't have to be super fancy, super expensive, just something to get me going here. So also I wanted to run off of 3.3 volts. And like I said, I2S input. I don't need microphone input. I want just output, which meant I was looking only for a DAC, not a codec. And I was able to find it. One thing that happened is, I went to DigiKey, and one of the things I've noticed about, like, when you're looking for I2S in particular, sometimes we'll see if I can find it now. It's a little challenging to find a specific thing like this where you're like, well, I wanted to do both headphone and speaker out. Like, there's nothing here that tells you what are the output options. It's like not something that like DigiKey keeps track of, which kind of makes sense because it's kind of a specific thing. And so I spent a little time kind of like noodling around here, and I was like, well, I want like an active DAC, and then I was like, oh, maybe I could find something that's class D, but it was like, there wasn't really the option. So that's when I kind of decided instead to look at the silicon vendor website to find the chip and then go back to make sure it's stocked at DigiKey. And that's where I would because that would be the distribution for it. It's a little bit of a different philosophy. Some people do that. They're like, well, I know that I want to use like analog devices for my accelerometer. So I'm just going to find the one that, analog devices makes. And like, you're going to do fine. You may not get the most price feature optimized thing, but you will probably get something fairly good, especially if you're used to that semiconductor company's products and you know what you're getting into. So in this case, because I'd used TI I2S audio decks, and I found them to be very reliable, very good, easy to use, well documented, not like some other series of chips that I've used. I decided to come here, and I was going to search on their site instead. So going to the TI audio, and I want the audio converter, and I want a DAC. So they have, they'll get you to this location. Now, I'll tell you another thing. It's like, there's like a huge family of chips here, and you can search this way, but let's see if I can search. Well, because I've zoomed in, it's like, do you want to? Let's view all the products. And to be honest, I didn't actually use this. I ended up just noodling around the website until I found the chip. But how would I have done it faster? So looking at all the filters, first off, for the control interface, I need it to be I2C because I don't have hardware and I don't have an extra SPI port. So I was like, okay, I want to do I2C for the interface. And this gives me like a lot of options. Second, architecture, and this is where I actually found what I was looking for, which is the Class D. So Class D is what I wanted, because remember, I wanted that speaker output. And remember, not a lot of chips that do I2S DAC have speaker, like an amplified speaker output. It's actually a little unusual. Usually they have line level, and they're like, you go do the rest of it. But I was actually lucky because there is a series from TI that kind of does all this, and there's a couple different options. So the first one is there's the TLV 320 DAC, 3100, 3101, 3120, and 32. And then there's also this Q1 series. And the pricing does, it kind of does affect it. Like the Q1 is the most expensive. I think this is probably automotive graded, but the rest are within the same kind of price range. They all have Class D. They all do sampling rate within my capabilities. I'm expecting this one does a little bit more, so we'll check those out. So the TLV 3200 stereo audio DAC with mono Class D amp and headphone driver and audio processing. And that's kind of lucky because I was like, this sort of was the first thing I looked up, and it was like kind of the perfect thing. So it's DAC input, and it says, it seems to me like the bit clock can also be the PLL input, which would be kind of cool because then I can save the M clock pin. There's an interrupt and stuff. There's I2C control. There's a full processing block, which can be used to make various filters. Basically, you can like DIY an equalizer using their internal blocks. So if you want to like do bass boost, or you want to do high pass or low pass filtering, and then, adjust the transfer to get better output from like your built-in speaker, because the output transform is non-linear, so you want to pre-adjust that. There's a Class D speaker driver here, and it can do, I think, 4 or 8 ohms. And then what's nice is that it has a Class AB headphone or line out driver, so you get stereo headphone output, and it can do 16 ohm drive. So that's really sweet. There's also a couple other, and what I like is they kind of tell you like, here's the alternatives. So this one is a stereo speaker output. It's a little bit more expensive because it has double the Class D. So you see there's 2 speaker outputs, and I think it's like missing, there's some GPIO or something that it doesn't have that normally would. I don't remember, maybe the mic bias or something. But if you were gonna, I don't need this stereo speaker output, but it does have stereo speaker out. So if this is something you need, I kind of like this. It doesn't give you, the trade-off is because there's a certain amount of dissipation you can have in this package. This one, it has stereo output, but it can only do, let's see if I can find it. 1.3 watt Class D 8 ohm speaker. So this one does like 1.5 watt 8 ohm, and the 3100 can do 2.5 watts into 4 ohms. So basically it's just like you get a bigger bump. You can actually do like, 3 watts is fairly loud. So I actually kind of like this more because I was like, well, I'd rather have something that can do, higher output into the speaker in case I ever want to, in case I want to go with a 4 ohm speaker, or in case somebody wants to like have it be fairly loud, as opposed to a lower wattage into 8 ohm because you have stereo output. So once I picked this one, which was cool, I'm going to DigiKey, and you type it in, and they have eval boards, and they also have the chip in stock, and they have a lot of them, which was kind of nice. There's 2 versions. Again, this one I think is the Q1. Maybe it's qualified differently, or maybe it's a different temperature range. Not sure 100% the difference between these 2. Maybe it's just on it's on a different, the tape and reel is bigger. This tape and reel is 3,000 pieces, and this one is 250. Whichever one. If you're doing cut tape, you might as well just go with this. That's a bigger reel, but you just get a cut off of the smaller one. But they have 13,000 in stock, and the price isn't too bad. So as I make this board, like, $1.25 or so is, I think, fair for like what you get, which is the DAC plus the headphone driver plus the equalizer plus the speaker driver, and you don't need any other external components. I love the integration of this. So I'm going to spec this part. I'm putting it into my design, the DAC 3100 TLV 320 series. It's a big series of chips. This particular one is my choice for my Fruit Jam board.
And that is the great search.
Where in the world is that part I need? The great search with DigiKey.
All right, that's our show. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll be broadcasting, showing cool stuff. Big week ahead if you're curious about the almost hourly changes with running a business, from tariffs to shipping to everything. We have articles, and we also did a little bit on Ask an Engineer. So go check that out, because I know people have questions, and we're happy to help and tell you what we're thinking about and doing as the news unfolds on a daily basis.
Yeah, and if people have ideas for this Fruit Jam, like what do you want to see this retro
Yeah, we need a name.
computer? Yeah, we need a name.
Yeah, I have some ideas.
You know, I have to save the file, so I saved it as like Fruit Jam, right? But Fruit Jam Rev A is not. That's not. I mean, I'm kind of getting into it now, but I think we could do something better.
We got ideas.
You got good naming ideas.
Something, something, something.
Yeah.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Okay, bye, everybody.